Welcome back to the Security on Happy Hour, where we bring together a group of security professionals and naturally cheery folks to discuss topics in the cybersecurity community, share knowledge, learn, teach, and exchange ideas. Now, before we get started, it's important to point out that the views and opinions expressed on the Security on Happy Hour and our related websites are those of the hosts, guests, and authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any one company. Today, my co-hosts, Lisa Bradley, Katie Noble, Crob, and I are going to talk about the Internet of Things devices in today's product security environment. And joining us today is Ken Munro, who is a security researcher, partner, and founder of UK's largest independent penetration testing firm, Pen Test Partners. He's a strong advocate of responsible disclosure and manages over 200 vulnerability disclosures per year. Ken regularly blogs on security topics ranging from car hacking, IoT security, and vulnerability analysis. With nearly 25 years of experience, he is a lobbyist for regulation of IoT technology in Europe and has extensive experience working with government and industry in the United States. Welcome to the show, Ken. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for the invite. Looking forward to this.
And maybe we could all start talking a little bit about what the heck IoT is. This is really, I get a lot of questions about what's the difference? What is IoT? So who wants to take a stab?
It's my Fitbit.
It's Internet of crap.
It's Crob's washing machine.
That like my Ring, the Alexas, the worlds, all that fun stuff. How the whole world is listening to me right now.
I feel like that's right, yeah.
And is there a distinction? Is there a line that gets crossed where something is IoT versus...
And there's a really good point, actually. It's come up during the process of draft regulation is, what is IoT? So you try and draft some regulation to go, hey, right, we're going to make the Internet of Things safe and we're going to keep all of our consumers and residents and we're going to keep everybody safe. And then you go, right, we're going to make IoT safe, great. And then you realize that whatever definition you write of IoT all of a sudden starts including laptops, desktops, cell phones, servers, like, crikey, how do we draw that line? So we're regulating for the security of actual IoT in the way that we all perceive it, like my Ring doorbell, for example, like my GPS watch. How do we do that? And that's often where regulators struggle a bit.
I know I struggled. So I typically go straight to NIST when I'm doing any kind of research and I want the official answer. And I read through so many NISTers. And none of them define it. I go to the glossary of each one and it's like, it doesn't say. It just, even the ones that are specific to IoT don't define what IoT is. They just talk about the Internet of Things exists and we should regulate that. And we should have guidelines and principles around frameworks.
Things is a big word.
Things.
I mean,
all those things you got, it's fine.
Aren't I a thing? I mean, yeah.
Generally, we're talking about devices that have some type of input and output. They aren't as robust as a laptop or a phone, but they have some external communication. They process some data. Some of them might be monitoring your gas line for a gas meter for usage. Others might be your smart toilet, stupid light bulbs and all this other nonsense that is basically talks to some external.
Making lots of money nonsense.
Light bulbs are the worst.
But it kind of gets difficult. So where does that boundary come? So, let's say we go towards, I don't know, embedded medical tech. So maybe you've got a pacemaker in your heart. Are you IoT? Are you now a cyborg? Maybe you've got a continuous diabetes monitor. Are you IoT? And sadly, I think there's a lot more research needs to be done to try to figure out where one stops and the other starts. But for me, it's as simple as it's an embedded system with some connectivity. But of course, that covers cell phones, laptops, the works. But I think for best intents, we can think about the Internet of Things as being consumer devices. Devices are out there to gather telemetry, maybe. And then you start going the other way. And this is where things get really interesting. So this is part of my lab. This is a graveyard of old tech. But I've got a lot of old operational technology up here, which is increasingly connected. So I've got a connected OT PLC here. Is that IoT? or is that industrial IoT, or is that OT? So it's really hard to deliver that boundary, and that's what I think what a lot of regulators struggle with. Is there, are we inadvertently regulating oil and gas? Are we inadvertently regulating OEMs of laptop and PC hardware? It's quite difficult to place where it goes.
Yeah, because, okay, so you said PLC, and I think when I think PLCs, I think electric power plants, because that's where I've seen PLCs before, in water plants and electric power plants. And we had another episode where we talked about industrial control systems and OT, and I immediately think, wait a second, how is this different from ICS? Isn't this the same thing as ICS? Like, where's the... Is
I
my
was certainly
Fitbit the same as a water plant? I'm confused.
I was confused. I was confused when we did the other podcast. I was like, because they blended it together to me, and I didn't really know the difference myself or what went where. So it sounds like I'm not alone, though, at least, right?
You'll be pleased to know that lots of OT routers are starting to be connected to the cloud. So you're seeing IoT vulnerabilities start hitting OT product, which is brilliant for security.
Yeah, I so much didn't know the difference when I was doing the research for this episode and writing out the show notes. I didn't even put the difference because I just wrote, wait, what's the difference? And I don't know that we can know at this point in life. And that's how I feel about that.
Yeah, and I don't know that we'll solve it exactly, but I feel like there are enough similarities between all the technology when we're dealing with security vulnerabilities, regardless of how cheap a device is or maybe how limited the functionality is. The vulnerabilities that you find need to be handled in a consistent way, consistent manner. It seems to be one, like when I've gone to DEF CON and when I've met with folks from like the IoT Hacking Village and had conversations, that seems to be the biggest hotspot. It's not so much what's the difference. It's, are you going to fix it? Are you going to pay attention to me? Are you going to actually, disclose the vulnerability?
I get it, but when it gets difficult is when they start making, like, was it California made some laws or something, and then you're like, okay, do I have to follow that for my thing or not, or is it do I fall in that category? If you can't define it that well, how do you know that you need to follow that law?
So there was a great deal of interest in the auto industry in California Senate Bill 327 about whether a vehicle, a passenger car, was an IoT device, and therefore did it have to be regulated? And I must admit, I haven't followed the lobbying in the last 12 months particularly, but as I understand it, it was explicitly written out that auto was decreed not IoT for the purposes of that act. But I could be wrong. I may have misunderstood, but it does show you how difficult it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we, all of us here work at big tech firms. So we're trying to figure out these laws and Crob, because you're Crob. But the rest of us work at tech firms, and like we're trying to figure it out because there's all these new acts and draft legislation that have been coming out. In December, there was a huge act that came out and called the Internet of Things, the Internet of Cybersecurity Improvement Act. That's it. Of 2020. And that bill was proposed, I think, by Senator Warner in like 2017. And when I worked for the government, I saw that bill 3-4 times. I redlined whole parts of that bill, sent it back. It came back with the same things I had redlined out. It just came back. It was just zombieism. It just came back and back. And it was interesting because like that bill requires several big things. It requires that like OMB create some sort of standards to increase government security. It requires that NIST put out some frameworks. But it's basically a vulnerability disclosure act. Essentially, the entire thing is about vulnerability disclosure and ensuring that the government be held accountable for the government's infrastructure and what the government is buying, in the hopes that it bleeds over into the private sector. Because if the government buys it, then there's a certain level of regulation around it now. But it's interesting because that bill is like, I think it might be a big kickoff to a bunch of other things, but it also contains mostly things that have already existed. So NIST already had standards, but now NIST has more standards. So I don't know. I feel like I keep seeing these legislations pop up more and more and more. And I wonder, where's that going?
And it makes me wonder again. So you're right. There's standards now on standards because, well, we need to be standard in how we handle these things. But it goes back to me. It kind of goes back to what's the difference between IoT devices and IoT security versus all the other technology that we've grown to know that was more common. And now the things that are people that people use every day, like the Ring doorbell and other things that are not, they're not, I guess, what you consider typical computing power, but it's something that affect people's lives. And I wonder if it's really just that technology, because it's developed so quickly, because it comes to market so fast. I wonder if that technology just needs, the vendors needed to be reminded that, hey, security is important. I'm just kind of speculating. I'm curious, Ken, what you've seen. I mean, you spent a lot of time in this space, probably more than anybody I know, and being able to look at the trends and directions around how security has been handled by vendors over time in this space. Have you seen an evolution in how they handle?
I think that's really interesting. Actually, there's definitely a case, isn't there? So over the years, when you buy a cell phone, you expect it to be supported for, say, 3 years, and you expect the manufacturer to have a disclosure program so security bugs get fixed, and you expect to know you're going to get a life out of it, right? And I think that's where things have kind of gone wrong in IoT, and that's probably the biggest border for me actually in IoT, is that vendors haven't made those thoughts. Is they've gone, hey, the most important thing to do is get my product to market first and fast, and everything else comes after. So back in the day of when mobile apps and app stores were the big money maker, you could fix problems in the field, right? You could push your app to the store, and if there was a bug, you fixed it, update, sorted, everything's fine. Now you have hardware in the mix, and your time from the foundry through to product is probably going to be 12 months or more. And if you make a mistake in the hardware, you are in real trouble, because you may not be able to fix that in the field. You may not be able to do an over-the-air update. And that is causing all sorts of problems. Now, we're slowly getting beyond that now, but we have this huge problem of legacy drag. I mean, Kayla, I'm sure many of you know, found the vulnerability in her 6 years ago. It's not fixable in the field. So we have this enormous drag problem. We've had 6 years of everyone piling into IoT. Let's make money. Let's be first to market. And you can't retrospectively apply security in IoT. That's the big problem.
So can you explain Kayla a little bit?
I was just going to say, for those of you that don't know Kayla, you should know Kayla. Can you quickly explain Kayla?
Yeah.
And all the terrible things that Kayla...
One thing I love, so Kayla was cited by one of the regulators that introduced California Senate Bill 327. Kayla's wonderful. She's an interactive talking smart doll. Talks over Bluetooth to your cell phone, where there's an app which does audio processing. So your child can speak to the doll. It can turn that voice into text, look up the question in the database in the phone, and then make a response. Cool. She's got a microphone, she's got a speaker, and she's got Bluetooth, right? This is effectively a Bluetooth headset in a dolly. So I kid you not, you can pair this dolly to your cell phone and make telephone calls on the doll if you wish. You do get some very odd looks, particularly when you're driving. But anyway, problem is that there's no Bluetooth pairing pin. So when you connect your cell to your vehicle, you put in a 6-digit pin, right? There's no pin with her, which means that anyone in Bluetooth radius, so next door neighbor, on the street outside, can connect the dolly, listen to the microphone, spy on you, or talk to your kid. That's bad, right?
Yeah.
That all went out, and with the help of a consumer organization in Norway, the Norwegian Consumers Council, actually successfully got her banned in various European countries, and she's actually illegal to own in Germany. You actually go to jail if you have this dolly in Germany, which makes it very awkward going out there to do talks about, but that's another story. The fun bit was, though, is we looked at this fun little dolly, and we wondered, could we make this innocent little kid's toy swear? And we discovered by editing the databases in the cell phone app, you could actually get her to swear like a docker. And she's actually recorded on our website, giving it a good old cuss. She's now banned in multiple European countries. She's illegal to own in Germany, like I said. And it's a great example of a manufacturer, a vendor, rushing to market without thinking through cybersecurity. It couldn't be fixed in the field, so the only solution was fundamentally to withdraw the product. Real shame, because it's a nice idea.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's, part of what IoT is the not just the speed at which we take things to market, but the nature, the disposable nature of IoT, right? I mean, what's the life of the doll ultimately, right? I mean, you'd think that this would get passed down from one child to another. It might live in a household for a period of time, but is what defines IoT the things that we might not keep for more than a couple of years?
Right, but
Yeah.
a
But
doll
even then,
you
right,
could
you
a
still
doll
have
you
to
would
close it.
keep longer, right? I mean, a cell phone you might get rid of after a few years, but a doll, I mean, my daughter has my old Barbies, right?
Right. Yeah. Good point. Right.
So there is no shelf life, right?
Shouldn't
Lisa,
be.
you've got a Ring, right? You've got a Ring doorbell.
Yes, I
So
have
when
a
was the
Ring
last time
doorbell.
you replaced the doorbell prior to your Ring? It was there forever, right?
It was there forever.
Yeah. Whereas now you've got a smart device. How long is that going to last for? Yeah. So it's,
I think it's actually I don't like it that much. I'm not a fan of it because I can't I'm on my porch and now it's recording and I like to sit out on my porch and talk to my girlfriends and I was like now everybody could hear my conversation. I lost my porch.
So how does that pivot into things like, I think, what did you call it, Ken, at one point? Spouseware? Spouse spyware? Was that the term you used? Because that's a very nefarious use of
I'm gonna
terribly
make this
invasive.
creepy.
Yeah. Sorry.
Let's make this
This
kind
is
of creepy,
security
shall we?
unhappy hour. We got to talk about tough topics. That's what we do.
So, I have young kids, and I don't know if you've ever done that thing where you go to the play park when they're still little, and you turn your back for a moment, and you turn around, and they've gone, all right, and you spend 5 minutes rushing around, going, "Where's my kid?" And they're on the next piece of play equipment, right, or they're just hiding behind a tree, and that obviously gets your heart rate up a bit as a parent. My kids are a bit older now, but a lot of companies were putting smart watches. The idea of having a GPS watch with a GSM SIM, so you had some mobile data on it. And then put that on the kids, which means you've then got an app, so you know where your kid is. Brilliant idea, absolute genius.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, and I think I get that, right? It's solving a critical issue that I've suffered from a couple of times as a bad parent, right? And problem is there was no security. As soon as one of my colleagues started poking at some of the smart watches, we discovered that actually anybody could get access to the position data of the child, and in some cases rewrite that position data so your child appeared to be somewhere else. Then it got super creepy because in order to do the cellular data, there's a SIM card in here. So this is effectively a very small cell phone with a microphone and the speaker. So you can do the same thing. You can trigger the microphone remotely without the child realizing and bug the poor kid, or then speak to them and creep them out. And this is a bit where it gets really, really unsavory. Is manufacturers are trying to do the right thing, rush a product to market that solves a parent that it tugs at our emotional heartstrings, but doesn't do the cyber bit, and then doesn't respond very well to disclosure when someone like us goes and says, "Hey, you made a mistake, but you could fix it like this," or actually, you can't fix it because you've chosen the wrong platform.
Right. So what do you normally say for somebody to say, "Hey, how could they fix it?" Like, what are your top key things that you say to companies if you're going to do this right? What would you do?
Well, in the case of children, I recommend getting an extendable doggy lead, right? So they never actually go. So it's getting better. I think the key is to think about security really early on in your development life cycle. So the day that you first put your product on a whiteboard, think about cyber, because a day spent on day 1 or day 7 or day 14 is going to save you either a lot of money down the line trying to reverse engineer and unfix broken things or fix broken issues, or it's going to result in a train wreck in the media or you having to withdraw your product. And that is really difficult. It's a very difficult thing to hear that product that you've owned, that baby that you've grown and invested and spent your time and cash and VC's cash, whatever, all of a sudden you take it to market and go, "Hey, we got a thing." And then horrible researchers like us come on and go, "There's a problem." And that's really bad. So start on cyber early. Just ask some questions. When you're outsourcing it, when you're getting someone to come and develop your mobile app or your API or your platform, ask some questions about cybersecurity. Then it'll save you so much time and money later.
Well, and what about, just make sure that you do the testing before you put it out, right? I mean, there's got to be, you could hire someone to hack at something, right?
So that's great. But what happens when the test comes back and says, well, you built on the wrong hardware platform and you can't fix the security vulnerabilities? And I'm going to give an example. One of the very first pieces of software, it's a smart tea kettle, right? So every European house has one of these. This is how we make our cups of tea in the morning, right? Smart tea kettle, all the smarts are in here. And the vendor chose a hardware module that had no security support at all. So it wasn't like you could push an update to it to fix the bugs. There was nothing you could do short of withdrawing the product. So what do? Do you compensate your customers? Do you accept the cost of giving everyone a free new tea kettle? How do you deal with that? And that's a really, really difficult issue that it's going to break a lot of innovative companies. And that's tough.
Well, and then when you can't fix it, it's like, I think the question comes, do you say anything? There's nothing that you could do, right? Do you say, hey, you have this, we know about this issue and we can't fix it, and
then hope those pesky researchers don't come on.
Well, right? No, it's a question of when you can't fix something, what do you do? But you are right in a lot of sense nowadays. A hardware issue can be fixed through a software update, which is great in a lot of cases. There's still a lot that can't. I mean, when you have to fuse a chip or something, you need to then bring it in, recall it.
Well, I was going to. I haven't got it to hand.
Spectre meltdown.
Pardon me, I had a cough.
I heard you. Yeah.
So a good example of getting things super wrong. So this is a car charger we looked at. So I'm a huge fan of electric vehicles, by the way. We've had a Tesla Model S, took it apart. That was fun. Doesn't go so well now, but we looked at this smart car charger, and the smarts inside it were built on a Raspberry Pi. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Pi, right? I think it's an awesome teaching resource, awesome learning resource. It's absolutely awesome, and it's hey, there you go. But it has a critical missing set of security features. It doesn't have the same sort of security support that you'd expect of a commercial embedded MCU. It's just not there. So it means that whenever you build and go to market on a Pi, unless you've really clearly thought about some of the security handling, your product's broken by default. What are you going to do? And that's a real challenge for organizations that have been used to going, hey, Pi, we can go to market fast. We understand Pi, it's great. But then they actually go and ship it maybe on a Pi compute module, and we come along and go, problem.
For the unindoctrinated, what is a Raspberry Pi?
Something you eat. My favorite pie.
It is a delicious sundry, but what the pie that Ken is talking about is a small little microcomputer. Costs between around, you can get them $20 to $60-ish US, and this basically will run a Linux-based platform or proprietary operating system, and you could make a camera out of it. I use this as a jukebox in my house. It's a great little hobbyist tool. I like doing things at home with it, but I was unaware of organizations interested in setting their enterprise and commercial goals on it, because from my perspective, it's a great little tool, but this isn't necessarily a full-fledged secure device.
I was laughing when we were talking about things because you were talking about the ring and the doll and the watch and all that. I put my tile on my dog's leash so that we could find her. Although she does still have a chip, but you can't find with the chip now. It's only when you find her. So we put the tile on her leash so we could always find her if she runs away. That was my creativeness. My son thought of that. But, I think when we think about things at home, when my kids were younger, I had 5 million different baby monitors, the ones with the video, and then the ones there, and then some you could talk to. And I always hear these rumors that if your frequency is sort of the same as someone else's, your neighbor could hear things and all that. And I mean, you hear these things, but then you still need to use a baby monitor. So what do you do?
One room
Difficult, isn't it?
apartments.
Yeah.
That's the DC answer. One bedroom apartment.
It's kind of difficult, isn't it? Because early baby monitors had no security at all. It was just a radio frequency that you could pick up with pretty much any receiver, and then you could listen to your neighbors talking to their babies, right? Which is a little creepy. But it was still only very short range. And I think the same principle kind of comes with Kayla. I mean, the attack was local. I had to be within radio range, so about 20 meters over Bluetooth or whatever. So then you started to see the idea of smart baby monitors. So you could dial into your baby monitor over the internet remote using a mobile app. And that's when I think, to my mind, everything changed. It's one thing your neighbors being able to spy on you, and you kind of hope that your neighbors were normal people. You kind of like them not to hear what you're talking about, but it's just your neighbors. The problem is
in DC, again, in a 17-floor apartment building, me and 2,000 of my closest friends.
Oh, okay. But then when you open it up to the internet, the attack is from everyone on the internet. And I think that's a game changer. It's not just whoever's near and around you and in your same apartment block. It's everyone on the internet. And that's a game changer for me, is when everything is now connected to the internet. The exposure is to the world.
Yeah.
We're sticking these devices in all kinds of things now. We used to just think like smartwatches and Ring doorbells. And I got real freaked out whenever I was working coordinated disclosure for the government, and we were seeing them in medical devices. And these medical device vendors, trying to do the best thing they could do, just bolted the kind of the Wi-Fi onto pacemakers. And
one of our VPs had a pacemaker, right? Yep. Yeah, that's it. It's crazy. My father-in-law now has a pacemaker. I was trying to tell him and ask him if they could do automatic security updates. He was a little confused with me, but that was one of my questions when he was putting it.
Yeah, and I have sleep apnea. And so my sleep doctor asked that I have a CPAP machine. And I said, no, thank you. But apparently my insurance company required that I have the CPAP machine, and that machine sends 2 weeks worth of data to my insurance company every year to prove that I still have sleep apnea. Or they can cut off my coverage. They can say, no, you have no medical issue here. You have perfectly fine sleep. But I mean, we're starting to get into my insurance company can say that I don't have sleep apnea because I didn't use my machine for 2 weeks every year.
Right. And you don't want to use that machine because you know that the security of it and your information is going to be potentially shared.
Yeah. That was a bad day for me at the doctor's office. I was, no. No.
But the difference is, Katie, is right? You're in this world, how many people are out there are grabbing the Ring, grabbing the monitors, grabbing the smartwatch for their kids, the dolls, and not even knowing or thinking to know about it, but then you have to weigh the balance here. My kids, the convenience of having an Alexa in my house when I can announce it's dinner and turn off my lights and my kids' lights and that stuff, versus the fact that I'm a security person and I have Alexa in my house, which is not good. I don't normally tell a lot of people, but now the whole world will know.
Don't target Lisa's Alexa.
Yeah, don't target my Alexa, please.
Yeah, but you bring up a good point. And I think I know, and I've known for a couple of years, but I have friends who are starting to know. And I think that's interesting because I have a friend. So I wrote down, I was like, I've got to tell this story. I have a friend, Dan, and he lives in the UK in South, and he works for a big bank. And he knows that I don't like Bluetooth devices. He knows that I have the adapter for my headphones and that I hate these guys. I have them, but I hate them. And he called me the other day and he's like, Katie, I know you hate Bluetooth. And that's how, that's going to be a good conversation when that's how the phone call starts. I know you hate Bluetooth. But I just bought these light bulbs and I don't know what to do with them. Okay. Thanks for calling, Dan. I recommend you throw them in the trash. But But that leads me into like these thoughts of these common devices that everybody has, and now people are seeing them. And like, one, what do you do? And two, Ken, what's the most interesting device that you've seen attached, have Wi-Fi? And
I'm going to come back to that one. Lisa, I want to come back to your point about medtech actually, because I actually have a lot of sympathy for medical device manufacturers, because when we think about devices around our home, if we update it and the update fails, so what? My doorbell doesn't work. I can't make my tea. That's bad, by the way. When I can't make my cup of tea, we've got trouble. But so what? I brick it. Device inside your body, if that's being updated and for some reason the update balks and you brick the device, or even weirder is put it into an unusual state, what do you do? And that's why medical devices traditionally had incredibly complex approvals processes. But now you're adding an incredible layer, this device that you can update inside your body. And it's got to work first time, every time. Otherwise, your patient dies. So I have a lot of sympathy for medical technology manufacturers. But I do think that there's still more they can do during the development life cycle to make sure things are built well in the first place. Because going in and, sending your kettle back to Amazon for a replacement because you bricked it, right? That's one thing. Going in for an operation to replace your pacemaker, that's another thing altogether, right?
Yeah.
So that scares me. To your point about Bluetooth, Katie, again, I don't think we should forget that, we're talking about local attacks in the case of Bluetooth. So we're talking about that radio range thing. What bothers me more is actually the APIs that those Bluetooth devices talk to through your cell phone. That's the bit that scares me more, because it's not everyone in your apartment block can see you've got Bluetooth headphones. It's the apps and APIs that your cell phone is using that then your headphones are talking through. Everyone can see that, and that's the bit I find freaky. But to come back to your question, one of the areas that freaks me out a great deal, in a small area, in terms of Bluetooth, is that of adult toys. Now, there's been a huge uptick in the use of connected adult toys during lockdown because people can't meet. It's very difficult to maintain a relationship over a long distance. And actually, historically, many of these devices were used for maintaining relationships in the military when a couple was separated over thousands of miles for long periods. And actually, I think it's fair to say that marriages and relationships were saved by the ability to maintain a quasi-intimate relationship. So, I'm not going to sit there and be sniffy about these and poke fun at them, because I think they do have a place in our society. What bothers me, though, is so many of these smart devices haven't been done safely and securely. And we're thinking about the most intimate of devices we're using in our bodies, potentially with audio and video, of very intimate personal sessions. And you kind of hope that they were subject to the same sort of privacy and security controls as maybe your banking was, right? Is that fair? You kind of hope that it was better than bank grade security. I want military grade security, right? My fleshlight, I want Uber security. I want it better than the space program, right? And unfortunately, that's not been the case. It is getting better, I might add, but I'm sure many of you will have seen this rather special device. It's called the Cellmate. It is a chastity device for the male penis. The idea being, sorry about this, is that put it on your thing, it clamps behind your testicles, and you're then locked in. Now, what's unusual about this is chastity devices have existed since the Middle Ages. What's interesting about this device is it's smart. There's a cell phone app that you lock the device using a mobile app. And then what gets interesting, again, the reason why it's a chastity device, is you then pass the digital key to someone else. So someone else now has control over you. And fine, it's not my thing, but there are areas of our society where it's part of their thing, and that's cool. And if people want to use these things, they should be able to. But what they shouldn't expect is trouble with security. And what we discovered is that actually that process of handing the key to someone else was flawed, and actually anyone could remotely lock or unlock your device. Now, unlock, so what? But you'd be pretty distressed if
you were consistently locked and couldn't get unlocked.
I know. And this
could you tighten it too, to take it over? And
This is case hardened steel, so if you want to get it out, so you have to get some very big bolt cutters or an angle grinder. Actually, the vendor, when we flagged this to them 9 months
So
after
many
we first
questions.
decided, yeah,
Yeah, I know.
you
This
can
is
release
great.
it, but I don't have a problem with vendors making mistakes in IoT security because it's hard to get it right. But what I do have an issue with is when a researcher reports something, you should deal with that well. So you should acknowledge the researcher. You should go, yes, cool, understood. We're going to take action. This is our plan for taking action. It's going to take this amount of time because of this, this, and this, and we're going to have it fixed by then. And then everything's fine, right? So everyone can learn. You can't be perfect every time, but you can respond perfectly. And that's where I think most IoT vendors get things really badly wrong. Is they don't take what researchers are trying to do, as in responsible, ethical, making things better, helping people, saving users from awkward situations where their junk's locked in something it shouldn't be. They don't. Instead, they'll often react, close the doors, ignore, hope will go away.
Well, right, but then, as a good researcher would do, they would say, you're going to ignore me. I'm going to go and tell your customers in the world.
We'll
And-
escalate.
Yeah. Right. Always as a last resort. But yeah.
Most vendors, they get it in the end, right? It's usually okay, but there are some who just do not get it. They do not understand at all. And they don't understand they've exposed their customers' data and more than their data. They just don't see that, and they don't see the responsibility they have for that. And in some cases, you're sat there trying to balance the safety of the vendor versus the safety of their customers, whose things and data is exposed. And sometimes that's the time to go to a responsible journalist, and we know a few very responsible journalists who will up the game, get the vendor to listen. Finally, the vendor fixes, and then there needs to be a story. But I'd rather it didn't get to that point. I'd rather organizations just listened, interacted, go, hey, thanks. That's all it takes. We fixed it.
Yep. So, Ken, I have a question. Although, I have a few questions.
Many people often do after that thing.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
so
well,
shocked.
I guess I get a little confused where we've been talking about like more at-home devices, but what about self-driving cars, or what about aviation and that area is that tie in here too? Or, I mean, because you were talking about like the pacemaker, but then a self-driving car, if someone took over, could they could die from that too, right?
We've all seen that. Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek did an amazing job back in 2015 with the GPAC, which was a really cool piece of research. And actually, it was that hack that inspired me and many of my team to actually get deeper into IoT. So, hats off to Charlie and Chris. They are amazing researchers, and I've got so much time for them. That started a train of events here that resulted in a lot of stuff, as you can see. I am very nervous about the idea of the autonomous vehicle. And the reason for that is we haven't got the security of the connected vehicle fixed yet. So we keep finding vulnerability after vulnerability in the telematics, so the way that connected vehicles communicate to your cell phone, to the vendor, to others. That still hasn't been resolved. Security still isn't great there. So until that bit's done, I'm not confident about the idea of the autonomous vehicle, because that autonomous vehicle needs huge amounts of connectivity. It needs 5G. It needs all sorts of data from all sorts of sources. And if we can't even secure the idea of the connected car yet, how do we secure the idea of the autonomous car?
Right, and half the time when there's an issue, you have to bring your car in, right, to get updates. It's so yeah, okay.
Although Tesla kind of got that fixed. I mean, I think that's one thing they've done a brilliant job actually, is because their entire platform is geared up around getting updates into the vehicle quickly. So whether it's connected to the vehicle connected to your home Wi-Fi or over cellular data, they can do that, and I think that's really cool. We did a huge project about a year or so ago. We reverse engineered that whole firmware update process. Really interesting. But most other vendors, they have to go to the shop to get an update or a patch, and that's where I think things are more challenging. That's where the rest of the auto industry is playing catch up to Tesla.
So I'm less concerned about mass transit autonomous vehicles than I am about personal autonomous vehicles, if that makes sense. I'm less concerned about self-driving trains than I am about self-driving cars. And I know there's been a couple of cities. Well, yeah, there's more of them, and there's individual choice, I think, that's involved there. So, like, there's a couple cities that have been doing buses. I think maybe in the Midwest somewhere. I read recently there's a city that's gone to a test of autonomous buses, and I'm okay with that because it's on a track, so it doesn't have as many choices. But when you talk about individuals going individual places, that makes me super uncomfortable because I don't trust. I always tell my husband, "You're a great driver, babe, but everyone else on the road." And I think that's my problem with autonomous cars.
Yeah, we have an autonomous rail system, have done in the UK and in the east side of London for a long time now. And I believe it's the only rail system in the UK where we haven't had a serious accident when it's been under automatic control. So it's actually safer in many cases than human control of a train, perhaps. Obviously, it's a very controlled environment, so the threats are quite different and the risks are different. But it's still fascinating that even I think it was mid-80s it first rolled out. Actually, even in all that time, it's still been safer than some human-piloted trains. Very, very specific use case, but fascinating all the same.
Cool.
So I think we're getting to kind of the end of our time, and I kind of wanted to say, what advice do you have, Ken, for the individual user? We kind of talked about vendors a little bit already, and some advice for vendors, but I kind of want to ask what your thoughts are on what advice do you have for users?
So some of it's boring, I'm afraid. So by far the most common route of compromise is poor and reused passwords on IoT APIs. So when you create that password in your mobile app that controls your IoT light bulbs or whatever it is, people keep using the same old shitty password they've used everywhere else. All right, and surprise, surprise, their app gets compromised, right? So use password managers. All right, that's number one. Number two for the consumer, I would say, is look for updates. So an increasing number of IoT devices auto push updates through your cell phone to the devices. I like that. I really like that. But do look for updates. Check for them if they're not auto pushed, because they're there to fix security updates. And I think the last thing we can expect of our consumers is to actually just try and push the market in the right direction a bit. There are a lot of IoT manufacturers who are taking security really responsibly now, doing a really good job of it. Tend to be the larger brands. So what I would do is I would Google search for whichever brand of device you're looking for and look for the word vulnerability with it. And if they've handled that vulnerability well, they're probably going to handle the next vulnerability well. But vendors who don't handle vulnerabilities well, or maybe have featured on our blog, I'm not so confident in. So it's not a bad thing to have a vulnerability hit the media. It's about how you dealt with it is the problem.
I have one more, and I have a shameless plug. What advice do you have for researchers?
Wow. Okay. Always, always, always be ethical. You will have experiences where you deal with very unethical vendors, and it might make you mad and it might frustrate the heck out of you. But it's really important that as a researcher, you always take the moral high ground. If you can't get the answer you want, I know what people want to do is just go, hey, I'm going to drop it as no day on Twitter because they deserve it. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the right thing to do, not for the vendor, but because it affects their customers. And you're effectively publishing a route to access their customers' data. So I'd suggest if the vendor's making you mad and they're not listening, involve a journalist you can trust who will also be ethical. And maybe they will raise the stakes. Or you could go and do something really cool. I don't know, like maybe go and apply for a CVE, because just having that CVE ready might be a good way of getting the vendor to listen. Use whatever levers you have, but please try to avoid dropping ODAs. I don't care about the vendor. I care about their customers.
Yeah, I think that was great. I think that was really good advice.
So my shameless plug is I'm reading a book right now called Practical IoT Hacking. And I really enjoy it because it is written for basically everybody. So as a researcher, there's a lot of tips and guidance, but as a security vendor, there's a lot of insight into the research process. As a program manager, there's a lot of information about what researchers are thinking and how they go about things. And so I'm really enjoying this book called Practical IoT Hacking. And I think that we're going to see more and more of these kind of, I think IoT is the future, and we're going to see a lot more in the media, in the world, in the real world, in the online world, everywhere on IoT world.
I think like my friends and family will, continually understand more and more about what I do because of these type of things. So lots of cool questions I get from people now.
I think that's the future. If we can get the average Joe, the average Jane to start asking questions about cybersecurity of the products they're buying, that creates a drive in the market. I'm not a huge fan of regulation. I like market forces to drive behavior. But if we can get that behavior to be driven by the consumer, we've won.
And on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our show. Ken, thank you so much again for taking the time to join us and sharing your knowledge and experience on vendors and researchers and for the end users. And for all of you listening, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.